Hello there, I'm Brian Goulet of GouletPens.com. This is episode number 86 of Goulet Q&A, and it is July 10th of 2015. Now, it's not actually July 10th in reality land for me here. It's actually July 2nd. I'm having to shoot this well in advance because our awesome videographer Jenny is taking a well-deserved vacation next week, which is this past week if you're actually watching this video. So it's a little weird having to shoot 8 days in advance, but that's okay. Would rather do that than not have a Q&A for you at all. So here we are. So I really don't have a lot of pertinent up-to-date. This is what we've been up to the last week because the last week hasn't happened yet, if that makes any sense. It's very, very meta, I get it. But we are planning to and probably will have published a couple of videos this past week. The Cross Botanica quick look as well as the quick draw video, which we're pretty excited about. So should be good. A little Western shootout style between me and Drew. Very fun, but yeah, that's pretty much what's going on here. So I'm pretty much going to get right into the questions. Got a bunch of pens and writing questions. That's going to take up the majority of them today. So not a wide variety of categories today, but that's okay. I'm sure you don't mind. I had to double up the questions given that I'm having to shoot 2 in this week. I shot the one for last week on Tuesday, and now I'm shooting the one for this coming week, Thursday, the week before. Anyway, it's a little confusing, but here we are, right? Got a pen, got a question. Oh yeah, and sorry, I haven't had my coffee yet this morning because Rachel's out of town and I had to get the kids ready all by myself and I was super late, so I'm a little bit not quite human yet. So if I'm drinking coffee and becoming more of myself as I do this broadcast, that would be why. Okay. Pens and writing questions, let's get into it. All right, first one I've got here is from Tom B on Facebook. I want to send my sister a fountain pen through the mail. Is it safe to send if it's inked, or should I clean out the ink? Okay, I get that. Like, you're sending it, you want to send it inked so that they can get the pen and get writing with it and stuff like that. So it's not a terrible idea. It's not unsafe, but chances are you're going to have some ink that gets somewhere in that pen. Like, usually it doesn't leak bad enough to get outside the package and ruin everything. If you put it in a little Ziploc snack bag or something, you can mail it out. But probably what's going to happen, this thing's going to end up going on a plane unless they're really close by. It's going to go on a plane, it's going to get shaken around and tossed around quite a bit. So you're going to have ink on the grip section. You may have ink that comes out of the converter area and stuff like that. You could have the converter that disconnects and stuff. It's very, very possible that you could have a little bit of an inky mess on your hands. Now, it's not a guarantee, and it's usually not so bad that it's something you have to completely freak out about, but I generally say it's a good idea to clean them before you send them out and send an empty pen instead of one with ink in it. As you can imagine, being here where we are, being in the pen business, whenever we get a return or exchange or something like that, we get pens back. And we always request that people do not send us inky pens. For one, because it sometimes creates a mess. And for two, for us, we have to clean it out and inspect it and stuff like that. So it's an extra step for us. But you don't really have to deal with that so much if you're sending it to your sister. She's not trying to inspect it or anything. She's just going to get it and want to write with it. So really, it's kind of a toss-up. It's up to you. Just give her a heads up hey, I'm sending a pen in the mail. It's a little inky. Put it in a Ziploc bag so that it doesn't get on whatever else that you're sending with it. And she'll be okay. She just might have to wipe it off and clean it up a little bit when she gets it. So it's really kind of up to you, but it's not the end of the world either way. All right, SUNisMAD.John on YouTube. Can you recommend some workhorse pens with great grips for comfortable long writing sessions between a $40 and $100 range? Okay, so let's see here. It's going to vary a lot from one person to another as what's considered comfortable. Okay, so my recommendations here are almost meaningless because really it's going to vary from one person to another. What's comfortable to me is very different than what's comfortable to my wife because she holds her pens with a 4-finger grip. I hold mine with a 3-finger grip. Her hands are much smaller than mine. Mine are massive, very long fingers and whatnot. She holds her pen at a much steeper angle. I hold at a much lower angle. So the aspects and attributes of what we consider to be comfortable pens are entirely different. It's kind of like driving a car. It's like people that are very different body shapes and sizes and stuff. One person driving a car will be very different level of comfort to another. And those are adjustable, the seats in a car. But the fountain pen, there's really not much you can do to change the pen as far as comfort goes. So, I'm really just going to be kind of speaking in super broad generalities here. So I would say that for longer writing sessions, generally, it's better to have a pen with slightly larger grip section. That's a kind of a blanket statement, but that's generally the case. Now that said, you don't just want to say a larger pen is best, because if you have a pen that's heavier, that gets more fatiguing in your hand for long writing sessions. So it's really kind of like you got two things that you kind of got to look out for. You got to get a pen that's slightly larger grip section, but also one that's lighter in weight in comparison to the size of the pen. So that's why pens such as Edison, Bexley, Omas, like the Mont Blanc 149, the Pelikan M800, M1000, Delta Dolce Vita, these are much larger pens that are slightly lighter for the size that they are. Also, a lot of these tend to be pretty expensive outside of your range that you're asking about, but that's why those pens tend to be more popular. Some of them it's kind of a status thing and it's kind of a design and whatnot, but a lot of them it's because they're larger pens that are lighter in weight and you are able to write with them for long periods of time. So people that write a lot really like these pens. So that said, these are all more expensive pens than you asked for, and I fully realize that. So basically, there's a couple of things that you can do. You can look in the Pen Plaza tool that we have on gouletpens.com to see grip section comparisons. You can also look into all the product. Like once you do that and you see like, okay, this pen's got a pretty big grip, generally you want to stay away from pens that are metal because they're going to be too heavy, especially if they're larger like this. So you want to stick to resin pens. So if you're looking at a pen that's got a larger grip section in the Pen Plaza and you see that it's resin, go over to our product page and you can see if you click on the technical specs tab, you can see what the weight of the pen is. And if you got a pen that's lighter in weight, I would say something that's under 30 grams probably would be ideal for a slightly larger pen, you know, under or around 30 grams, then you're going to be in good shape for an overall weight. Now, of course, if you don't use your pens posted, you could even get something that's somewhat heavier and if you're not going to be posting it. We also have the dimensions there of just the body, just the cap, and the overall weight. So if you know you're not going to post your pen, you can look at just the body weight of the pen, and that'll tell you what the weight without the cap is. So it might give you a little something extra to go for there. So pens that are kind of bigger and like that, you know, Conklin's got a couple. The Durograph is one that might be worth consideration. The All-American is even bigger. A lot of the Edison pens are like that. They're bigger and lighter pens. Now that gets a little bit outside of your price range here, so I fully realize that, but the Edison Collier, I'll just throw it out there. The Edison Collier is one that is extremely popular, kind of for that reason. That is not a postable pen. It's not even doesn't even give the option, but that's a lot of why people really like that one. And also the Noodler's Ahab. That's honestly a lot of the reason people like the Ahab is because it's larger like that. Now that grip has got kind of a weird step thing going on, so some people love it or hate it, I don't know. But you get an Ahab, and it does come with a flex nib, which is not really the best for a lot of writing, but you can swap it out with a Goulet nib or a Noodler's, you know, non-flex nib for just a couple of bucks, and you can have yourself a pretty decent writing pen for actually under your $40 range there. Noodler's Neponset would be another one. That one again has a flex nib, but it's a number 6 size, so you could always swap that nib out. That would kind of still fit in your price range there. So those are some of the ones off the top of my head that I think would kind of get the job done. I mean, there's definitely other pens like that could do it, but the challenge is to get something that's a large enough grip section that is going to be, you know, comfortable. But again, it's going to depend. So you know, I would love to know, you know, from everybody watching this, you know, leave in the comments what you think some of the best pens are for long writing sessions. And when I say long, I'm talking like more than half an hour at a time. That's what I would consider to be long. That's really kind of just like coming out of my mind. But, you know, my wife and I just did a marriage retreat where we had to do writing sessions, and one of the writing sessions was 75 minutes. So 75 minutes of continuous writing. I was using a Lamy 2000 during that set. No, what was I using? Yeah, I was using a Lamy 2000 during that particular session. And it was very comfortable for me, even for writing for 75 minutes. So it's a kind of thing that it's going to vary a little bit from person to person. And one factor that will come into play, not just about the size of the pen, but also the nib. Going something with a smooth nib that you're comfortable with. Generally, people that write a lot like that like broader nibs, mediums, broads, you know, maybe even stubs, but generally like broader nibs because it's just less effort and the ink just comes out, you know, pretty reliably for when your hand is getting more tired. So that's kind of what I'll leave you there. And then just kind of as a little final thought here, some of the other more expensive pens that I mentioned, I'm not trying to push those, but it's not just the size of the pen, but also when you get into those more expensive pens, you get into gold nibs and nibs that are softer, smoother, that kind of thing. That also helps to keep your hand from getting fatigued. So if you really are going to be writing a lot, it might be the kind of thing that it would be worth considering getting up out of that price range for the sake of your hand. But not to say it can't be done within that range, but hopefully I at least somewhat point you in the right direction, trying to teach you how to fish rather than give you a fish on that one. So I got a question from Simon Raul and Ray. Sorry, I probably totally botched that on Twitter. So how does your Custom 74 look after so many years? Could you please zoom in so that I can admire it? Okay, so I played around this beforehand. Here's my Custom 74. Carry it around and use it and stuff like that. It's empty at the moment. I'm in between inks on this one, but I've been using my fine nib a little bit more lately. The medium's been taking a well-deserved break. But I actually looked up, I did a Pilot Custom 74 first impression video where literally it was like the first day that I'd ever used this pen. And I posted that video on April 6th, I guess, of 2011. So it's been over 4 years that I've been using this very pen. So I got this one fairly early on in my fountain pen career. It was my first gold nib pen that I personally owned. And yeah, I've been loving it ever since. So I pulled it out and like tried to zoom in and get a good shot of it. I really wasn't able to show you much. However, I recently published a video on the Pilot Custom 74 quick look. So it's just a little 2 and some minute video that features some of the highlights of the Custom 74. But if you look at that, you can see close-ups of this very pen. So I know I'm sending you to another video and you maybe not like that as much, but that right there is what's up. So you can see close-ups of my pen. It's held up remarkably well. You know, I'm sure it's got like little bits of wear here and there, but honestly, not really. It really looks pretty good, gotta be honest with you. So this pen is held up. I do take care of it, you know. I don't, when I'm not using it or having it out on my desk like this, I'll put it in a pen sleeve or a pen case or something like that. You know, it's a nice pen, so I want to do that, but really no hardware to speak of. All right, VickNish on the blog asked, after listening to your comments about the Omas Arte Italiana Vision Extra Fine, I was curious how the super soft Pilot Custom Heritage 912 FA nib compares with the Omas extra-flessible nib. Not that I have the extra 5 Benjamins to drop right now, but just wondering for future reference. Absolutely. Yeah, so, well, first of all, the Pilot Custom Heritage is like half the price. So that's a consideration for sure. Definitely a different type of pen. But both of the nibs are really soft, but they are a little bit different from each other. And I'll try to explain as best I can how they're different, but it is very subtle and it is something that is more noticeable when you're writing. So to try to describe it is challenging, but I'm up for that challenge. So the Pilot Custom 912 FA, that's technically called their Falcon nib, which is different than the Pilot Falcon, which is a whole different pen, whole different nib, all different getup. Don't even think about them as the same thing. It's very confusing, I admit, but the Custom 912 has a Falcon FA nib on that pen that is really, really soft, and it's got some mixed reviews, okay? It's even got mixed reviews among the Goulet staff here. So the challenge that you have with that pen is that it is a Japanese pen, and that pen in particular is really meant kind of more for a Japanese style of writing. So when you're writing in these Japanese characters, now I'm not well versed in how to actually do it, so forgive me if I'm speaking somewhat out of a little bit of ignorance from personal experience here. But they hold their pens a little more upright, and they tend to write in shorter strokes. Quick little kind of strokes with little bits of line variation. It's very different than the longhand form kind of Spencerian style that we might have in America or in many parts in Europe. So when you're writing with this FA nib and you're trying to do these long strokes where you're flexing it out and have a really high ink demand on the pen, you're going to have a lot of ink breakup. So it's going to start to railroad, it's going to have some ink flow issues, which really aren't issues if you're writing in the way that the Japanese write. So it's It's something that is available here in the US now with the custom 912, but for a lot of people, the way that they write is kind of outside of the way that that pen was intended. So it does better if you hold it upright, and it does better if you're writing, you know, kind of script, but not flexing it out too hard. So that's basically it. It is extremely soft, but if you're like me, if you write relatively quickly, if you write with a really low pen angle and a lot of writing pressure, you're going to struggle with that nib a little bit, and you're going to have to really adjust how you write if you want to get used to that nib. Now, the difference between that and the Omas extra flexible nib. The Omas extra flexible nib is a more traditional, it's a number 6 size, it's a slightly larger nib than what's on the 912, and it's a more kind of traditional European nib. So it's a little bit wetter, and it's a little, the cut on the tines is a little bit deeper, so it gets a little bit more spread on the tines, so it's a little more line variation. So the challenge you have with the Omas, the ink flow will keep up, you know, pretty much as you try to flex it out. But the challenge you have is the nib is very soft, so it's easy to spring the tines. If you know, it's not gonna have the issue like with the custom 912 where the ink flow kind of dries up and it starts to break up, and you know, you don't have as much tendency to overflex that nib, because why would you keep flexing it if the ink breaks up? You know, it's like you would stop. But the Omas, the flow keeps up. It's got an ebonite feed on that, which definitely helps, you know, with the capillary action. And as you're flexing it, you want to just keep flexing it more and more and think, oh, if I can go this broad, maybe I can go even broader, you know, so it doesn't really stop you. You have to be kind of disciplined in how much you're pressing on that nib. And the first time I used it, I sprung the tines for sure. I know Stephen Brown did his video on the Ogiva Alba. He did the same darn thing. You know, you're gonna have a tendency, if you're coming from the Pilot Falcon, the original Falcon, not the FAA, but the Falcon, or if you're coming from the Noodler's Ahab or Conrad or whatever, you're used to having to write with a little more pressure, you know, very intentionally to kind of get those tines to spread. So if you have the same tendency to want to do that with the Omas, you're going to spring those dang tines. You're going to do it. I know it's going to happen. So you got to be careful with that thing. So that's kind of the major difference between the two. So the Omas, the ink will keep up, but it's easy to spring those tines, which if you don't spring them entirely and make the pen like so spread out that it doesn't write reliably, then you could at least spring it enough so that it increases the ink flow and then doesn't write back to the original kind of extra fine line that you originally desired. So if you got that extra fine and you're springing it, I wouldn't go any broader than probably like a broad nib size would go. So it's really just, it's meant to be very soft. You have to write with a light hand, and it's meant for kind of a lower pen angle. So Falcon, higher pen angle, short strokes, works best. You know, ink will break up if you flex too much. The Omas, wetter, broader, lower angle, but it won't stop you, so you might spring the tines. So that's the big difference between the two. You know, aside from all the other aspects of the pen, I just focus purely on the nibs, but should give you a little bit insight there as to what you're dealing with on that. All right, Kevin L on Facebook asked me, in general, what makes one pen a hard starter and one an always reliable starter? And does brand or price factor into it all, or perhaps ink as well? Let's throw paper in there too. You know, it's like, yeah, all these things can come into play. I kind of hesitated to take this question a little bit, Kevin, to be completely honest with you, because it's so broad. There could be so many different reasons and explanations for why a pen is a hard starter. So I'll try to kind of cover all the high points as best I can. But a lot of it, though, boils down to the nib and how it's tuned. That's a lot of it. You know, definitely there are factors with paper and ink and writing pressure and angle and all this other stuff. But basically, the nib and like the way that it mates up to the feed and everything is a big factor in how a pen is going to start or how it's going to write. So definitely, yeah, certain nibs, brands, models are known for being more or less reliable than others. You know, you can look at all these different reviews. We have a lot of product reviews on our site. You can see what tends to be more reliable than others. So certainly that could be the case, because the way that it ends up working is a lot of pen companies will you know, use nibs across different pen models. So you'll see like if one pen model uses the same nib as another pen model, it's going to write very similarly. So there's things like that that you could take into account. But not every nib is made custom for every pen that's out there. You know, think about like, I've got Goulet nibs, right? I get them from JoWo in Germany. Edison uses JoWo nibs as well. And so there's several different manufacturers that use JoWo, basically a Bach and JoWo in Germany. And those are both nib companies that make, probably easily 90% of the nibs in the world. You know, I think that's pretty safe to say that. Maybe that's not an exact accurate figure, but it's probably pretty close. Then you have other manufacturers like Lamy, Pilot, Platinum that make their own nibs for their pens. And that's cool, they can do that. I think Omas does that too. But you don't, you know, you don't necessarily have like super consistency across all brands and models and stuff like that. So you do kind of need to take that into account. And then price definitely comes into account as well. You can certainly have an expensive pen that's a hard starter. You can certainly have a cheap pen that writes very reliably, you know. A lot of it comes down to quality control, how much time is spent in the QC process, how complicated the pen, you know, honestly, like one of the best, most reliable writing pens and with the smoothest, you know, kind of all-around nib I've used that I could recommend is the Pilot Varsity, which is $3. You know, it's a little disposable pen, but the dang thing always starts up and it's really, really reliable. And I've got other pens that are hundreds of dollars that, you know, you can hardly ever get started. So it gets kind of frustrating when you think like, well, I'm paying a lot more for a pen, it should write so much better. And yeah, technically, it really probably should write better, but it's not necessarily always the case. And I have to speak in super generalities here because there's so many different pen models, so many different things going on. But in general, you can typically expect that when you're spending more on a pen, you're going to get a little more reliable writing experience. That's not necessarily always the case, but that's usually the case. And there's usually like a threshold there, like especially once you get up into the gold nib pens. Once you get into gold nibs, that's when manufacturers really are paying more attention to quality control and stuff like that. Not that they're not paying attention on steel nibs, but that's when people's expectation gets really kind of high as to how reliable a pen should write. Steel nibs, it's kind of like, well, it's a steel nib, you know, and people can tweak them and adjust them themselves and they're not too scared. Gold nibs, people usually don't mess around with themselves, so they expect them to write really well from the manufacturer. So that, I think, is kind of more of a consumer expectation kind of thing. So you get a pen like the Custom 74, you're not going to get this pen and be like, oh yeah, I'll just use micromesh and smooth it down and mess with the tines. No, it's a $200 MSRP pen, you know, so you're not going to do that. You're not going to do that like you would with a $15 Metropolitan, you know what I mean? So that comes into play for sure. So as far as hard starting goes, let me talk about, you know, hard starting and maybe what could be causing that. So there's several different things. One thing that can have hard starting, and basically hard starting means you touch the nib to the page and it doesn't start writing right away. You either got to like tap it a little bit or draw in some squiggles or press on the nib a little bit to get it flowing. There's several different reasons. One could be that, you know, a nib related reason could be pinched tines. So basically, you have the tines, they're supposed to come together and almost barely touch right at the end. That's to assist in capillary action. You want them to be parallel or slightly turned into each other to assist in that capillary action so that when you're writing, the ink has got a nice little channel to go on. If they're splayed, meaning they're going out a little bit, and let me like dramatize here a little bit. If it's splayed like that, the capillary action is going to want to work it in the reverse direction, and it's going to want the ink to crawl back up into the pen. So that's part of what can be the problem sometimes. So you want it to be either parallel or slightly turned in like that. And you can tell that somewhat when you're looking at it with a loop. Do I have my loop handy? Yeah, it's around here somewhere. Okay, I don't have it handy to show you, but it's a loop. So check out the Goulet loop video for how to like tune your nib just a little bit. You also have, yeah, okay, so I talked about pinch tines. Pinch tines basically is when it's turned in, but it's turned in so much that the tips of the nib are actually touching, or maybe even like pressed right on each other. So the ink wants to flow in, but it's kind of like losing a space there to flow through. So that could be one reason. That's a pretty easy fix. Basically, you press on the nib a little bit as you're writing, just like in little short strokes, like kind of overflex a little bit, and it'll kind of like spread those tines out It's easy to overdo it, so don't go nuts, but you can do it just a little bit at a time, and it'll kind of spread those out a little bit. For anybody that's had hard writing issues with like Monteverde or Conklin or Twisby, they have, you know, kind of a reputation somewhat on some of their nibs of having pinched tines. It's a very easy fix if you know what to do. It takes like a minute maybe to be able to kind of flex that out and get them going again. Now if you overdo it, it's a little more complicated, so try not to overdo it as far as how to fix that. Now if you have splayed tines, that's when your tines are pointed out like that, then you're going to have usually a much more serious problem. And to get that back is kind of more of like a 102 nib tuning class. You know, there's a couple different methods that you can do. You can actually pull the nib out of the pen. You know, that would be one option, and I'm not going to actually mess with this nib too much, but you know, so you can pull it out of there and then you can kind of bend them back in place. That gets a little risky if you don't know what you're doing. Another method that I've been told by some people that do nib work, and you may or may not want to do this method as well, is to actually pinch the tines together, and you kind of use your fingernails and you twist the top one tine over top of the other, and then you twist in the other direction, and you just do that a few times, and then it'll kind of work its way back. And then you have to readjust them, because that almost always throws the nibs, like the tines off of alignment there. So none of this is stuff that you should really be doing if you have no clue what's happening. But if you've messed with your nib and tines a little bit before, you might be brave enough to give some of this a shot. I wouldn't recommend doing any of this stuff unless you've got like a cheap pen that you don't care about, that you can mess with. You know, that's where Goulet nibs can help. They're inexpensive enough where you can throw it away if you are terrible with it. Or like a Noodler's $2 non-flex nib are really great for that. Or if you have like a Jinhao or something like that, it can work really well. Another reason that it could be hard starting is baby's bottom. Now, baby's bottom is a term that's thrown around a lot, and I actually believe I have a question later in this Q&A about baby's bottom more specifically. But essentially, baby's bottom is a nib that you have that's really smooth but skips or hard starts, which can be kind of confusing. It's like, what's going on? That basically, you have the tines of the nib. Now, if you're looking straight on at the nib, as if I'm going to stab you in the eye with it, you know, you're looking straight on at the nib. Here's the tip. So it's got the two tines, which are my arms. You got the ball, the tipping material, which is here. So essentially, what's happening with baby's bottom is you have the capillary action that's drawing the ink through the slit like this. And then it needs to come down as you're touching the paper, and that's the flow of it. But if you have, it's too, basically baby's bottom is when it's too rounded on the inside here. So the edges on the slit at the point where it touches the paper are too rounded, and I'm gonna try to like manipulate my hands enough. So we'll go like that, there you go. So it's like a normal nib should be kind of like this, maybe splayed just a little bit towards the bottom. But if it's too rounded, it's going to write really smooth, but there's too much of a gap here where it needs to be touching the page for the ink to consistently get down there. So usually you can tell it's a sign of baby's bottom when it writes really smooth and it has like starting or skipping issues that are fixed by when you give a little bit more pressure on the nib. So that's when you can tell, like when you give more pressure, because that flexes out the tines a little bit more and forces more ink to come down, and then it fills in that gap and it writes again. But if it's consistently doing that, that's almost always a sign of baby's bottom. Now that can be fixed. You can use a little micro mesh or a little mylar paper is usually not aggressive enough to fix that easily. Mylar paper usually does the trick, some little figure 8 patterns on micro mesh, and that will kind of wear away the bottom and get it kind of back to normal. Now, you may have to do a little bit of work in figure 8 in kind of different directions and stuff, but I got a tutorial on micro mesh. I think I'm like halfway answering the question that I have later on. Yeah, sure I am. That's all right. It'll be a little bit of duplicated information here for you, but that's all right. So yeah, that's part of it. It could also be that you're having flow issues because your pen needs to be cleaned. I probably should have said that first. Always clean your pen first if you're having any starting issues. It's always good to clean even a new pen. Sometimes you can have manufacturing oils or little debris and stuff like that that are left over from the manufacturing process that can give you some hard starting issues and flow issues and stuff like that. Ink can definitely influence it as well. There's certainly drier inks like the Pelikan 4001 series or Parker Quink. Those are some really dry inks. There's some other ones out there too that are just kind of random inks here and there, but you know, the The ink can be a big factor as well. So you can use a wetter or a more lubricated ink that can help to fix those issues if you are having them consistently. But yeah, that's definitely a factor as well. And then your paper too, you know, if you have more absorbent paper, it's going to help to fix kind of some of those issues as well. But that's a little bit of info for you there, Kevin. Hopefully that helps point you in the right direction. Little pen education. Cara E on Facebook asked me, I'm excited about the release of the Pilot Vanishing Point stub nib, which should be available pretty darn soon, and Jerbon 1670 Emerald of Chivalry ink. Do you think they would play well together? Well, that's a great question, and I'll be able to tell you fairly soon because I will have the stub nib sometime soon. I was told mid-July, which is getting pretty darn close now. Emerald of Chivalry, I have one bottle of that as a kind of a sample, but that actually won't be available for the public until August. I would probably say late August. That's if it doesn't get delayed, which it very well could be. So that said, I do have Emerald of Chivalry in my Pilot Custom 912 stub, which I found to write pretty similarly to the Vanishing Point stub. Now the Vanishing Point and the Custom 912 are two very different nibs in terms of shape and size and stuff like that. But they're both from Pilot, they're both ground in a very similar way, about a 1.0 millimeter stub. And from what I remember using the Vanishing Point stub, and I have a video on the Vanishing Point stub, which I can't remember if I compared the 912 stub. I should have. Maybe I did. I should have looked that up. But anyway, you can go look at it and tell me if I did or not. You know, I do find those nibs to write very similarly. So I think I can pretty well guess that, yeah, it is going to perform well. Emerald of Chivalry's got, you know, some extra, like, you know, specs and stuff like that in there as part of why it looks so amazing. So it is going to need to be cleaned a little more often than a conventional ink would, but I've been using the Custom 912 stub with the Emerald of Chivalry for the last week or so, and I haven't had any flow issues or anything like that. So I think if you're in a drier environment and the ink tends to evaporate a little bit more out of your pen, you may have to clean it even more often than you would with a normal fountain pen ink. And I think depending on the pen too, you know, but you're asking specifically about the Vanishing Point stub, that pen does a pretty good job of sealing the ink up in the nib. Even though it's a click retractable, it does a pretty respectable job of keeping that nib wet. So I do think that they will play very well together, and I do think it's going to be a really great combination, personally. So it'll be interesting for me to try once I actually get both in my hands at the same time. All right, Shubhranshu D on Facebook asked me, what is the right way to use a stub nib? Angled to the paper, like this, or like this? I prefer the former as I get more line variation with a 1.1 millimeter stub. But is there a right way? So basically you're talking like, do you need to have, you know, if you got the tip of the stub nib, so, you know, if you got the tip of the nib and you're looking at it like this, a stub is going to be ground kind of flat like this. I think he's asking, like, do you have it like this, or do you have it at an angle? Personally, I think at an angle, because that's going to be more natural to the way your hand writes anyway, and that's the way that I see most people writing with stubs. Having it like this would be a little more unnatural. Now, if you really turn the page a lot, and then you write, you know, kind of an angle, you could kind of emulate more that straight-on look, but I believe that the correct way that stubs are meant to be done is like this. Now there are oblique nibs, which is kind of like a stub that's cut at an angle, which if you had an oblique that was a right foot oblique, so it was ground like this but kind of turned like this, but you turned your hand more like this, that would write a little more straight on. But that's really not common. That's really not common at all, and it would give you kind of an interesting looking writing. But I think the way that you're looking to use it at an angle like that is more of the proper way. But honestly, you do whatever you want. It's your pen, it's your stub. You write however you feel that it looks best and whatever feels most natural to you. Cool? All right, that was all the pen and writing questions. Whew, man, a lot of them this week. I only have 11 questions this week, and that was 7 out of the 11. So now I'm going to talk about ink a little bit. All right, got a couple ink questions. Got an ink question from Jason L on Facebook. Jason asks, which popular inks are easy to clean? Recently, I just noticed how easy it is to clean a pen with Noodler's Purple Martin. One rinse and it was gone. Comparing that to some other inks I have, I was amazed. Can you give a list of comparison based on your experience? Thanks. I don't have like a master list of inks that are easiest to clean. I have a lot that are kind of from memory or like ones that I know are pretty good, but in general, most conventional fountain pen inks, non-permanent inks, non-shiny, sheeny, whatever kind of, inks like non-1670 Jerabon or no pigmented or none of that kind of stuff. Most of them are going to be somewhat easy to clean. So it really depends on kind of the properties of ink, but even still it can vary from one to another, and there's not like any super consistent, telltale sign that like, yeah, this ink is going to be great to clean, unless somebody's already done it and used it and reviewed it and stuff like that. So that's the best thing to do, is if you are looking for a particular ink, like for example, look at the product reviews. That's one way to tell. If people are like, oh my gosh, it's so easy to clean, okay, great. Or literally just Google, like if you're looking at Noodler's Purple Martin, Google Noodler's Purple Martin review. You'll probably see some people on Fountain Pen Network, some bloggers, whatever. You can glean a little bit and see how easy it is to clean. Now, I don't have like a master list compiled for you. I know that's what you're asking for, Jason, but I don't have that. I do have a lot of other kind of special features on the Goulet product review site, where you can see things like shading and dry time and flow and saturation, water resistance, but I didn't put ease of cleaning into the parameters of that thing. Now I probably could have, but I didn't. And it was the kind of thing like, okay, I could do that, I could do spread and feathering and bleeding, like all these other factors, but it was to the point where like if I go more than really 5 parameters in asking people to rate something in a product review, I will start to lose a lot of people that will not want to do those product reviews. So it was kind of a trade-off that I made. Ease of cleaning did not make the cutoff in terms of what I wanted to build onto our product reviews on our site. But that said, there's still plenty of people out there that have done individual reviews and so on. And that's where an ink sample can really help a lot too, because you can get a good idea before you commit to a whole bottle. But in general, so I'll give you some kind of a list of what I have. I find that some of the easiest to clean personally have been Jerabon inks, the non-1670s. Those take a little more work, but just the conventional Jerabon inks, very easy to clean. Pretty much all the Pilot Iroshizukus are pretty darn easy to clean. Rohrer and Klingner, a lot of their inks are very easy to clean. Various other like less saturated brands like Lamy and Schaefer, Waterman, those are generally pretty easy to clean. Speaking in super generalities, reds and purples are usually a little bit tougher to clean out because of whatever dye. I think it's like a red dye or something that's in there. A lot of pinks too could sometimes cling a little bit. And then certain like blues and stuff like that. Definitely not any Bay State inks. Those you need bleach to clean out, which the bleach does cut through it pretty easily, but a lot of those will kind of stick in there. So that's something in there. So the conventional Noodler's inks, like the Purple Martin, what you're talking about here, that definitely kind of fits into that category of kind of what I just mentioned of these conventional non-waterproof inks. Yeah, that's about it for that one. Sorry, it's like a weird buzzing going on. It's really kind of throwing me off. It's like a fly. There was a fly in here yesterday and it was driving me nuts. Anyway, Gordon H. from Facebook has a question. I'm a big fan of Waterman ink. I like how it's so well behaved and never seems to have any issues no matter what pen I put it in. That said, the color selection is somewhat limited. Can you recommend equally well behaved inks in other colors, specifically orange, pink, and gray? Okay, I will stick to orange, pink, and gray because that will give me quite a few just to announce here. So I just picked like 3 to 5 of any given color. So orange, and I'm pretty much just going to name these. My coffee mug, that was the noise. It was like the pressure from the coffee mug. Okay, it wasn't a buzzing noise. I thought it was going crazy. Anyway, all right, okay, equally well-behaved inks. I mean, yeah, okay, well-behaved is going to vary based on pen and paper and blah, 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 blah. But some of the inks that I like that are pretty just all-around general good inks. For oranges, I have Noodler's Apache Sunset. I just love that ink anyway. Pilot Iroshizuku Yu Yake is a good one. And Jerabon Orange Indian. Those are good, pretty easy to clean, pretty well behaved, not a lot of fuss, all pretty nice looking oranges. For pinks, I got Diamine Hope Pink. That's a popular one around the Goulet office. Pilot Iroshizuku Sutsuji is another good one. Rubber and Cleaner Sulfurino. That one doesn't get a lot of fanfare, but I do like it. Pilot Iroshizuku Yamabudo. That's a deeper, more of a magenta color. And then kind of on that same vein, Noodler's Saguaro Wine. You know, those are a little more saturated colors, popping magenta type pinks, but I figured I'd throw those in the list. Then for gray, I have Diamond Graphite, which I like. It looks kind of like a graphite pencil. Pilot Iroshizuku Fuyu Shogun. I like that one. And then I threw this one in here, Noodler's Lexington Gray. Now it is a permanent ink, so it is just a little more maintenance than some of the other ones, but it is a fantastic writing gray. I do like it a lot, so I thought it was worth throwing in the mix. I got one paper question for this week, so here we go. So ShrykeWindgrace on YouTube asked, is there a way to know, other than trial and error, whether a given sort of paper would affect the color of my inks? So, you know, Shrike wrote a little more of an explanation there, but basically getting a little bit of a green to blue kind of difference depending on the paper itself. So yeah, no, my answer would be no, not really. Fortunately, or I guess unfortunately, trial and error is pretty much going to be your best bet when determining how a pen and ink is going to react on a given paper. There's just too many factors to come into play as to be able to predict exactly how it's going to work. There's a lot of different aspects of ink and paper and stuff like that that could come into play that aren't even publicized or known about. So pretty much trial and error is about the only way to do it. That's why we push, you know, ink samples so much around here. And actually right now we are doing an ink sample palooza, 20% off individual ink samples there. Just thought I'd shout that out. But yeah, so pretty much trial and error is the way to do it. Part of the beauty of this hobby that I think is the fact that there is so much variation. You can get such a unique writing experience, and you know, if you're looking for absolute consistency, you want one ink color and it's going to write such and such way on every single paper, every single pen, and so on. This is going to be a really frustrating hobby for you, and you're going to want to stick to like your one pen ink paper combination and never deviate from that. Me personally, I got hundreds of pens, many different inks. I use all different kinds of paper. For me, the experience is more in the journey than it is in the destination. So I appreciate having paper that the ink looks different on different types of paper because it's a new experience for me. I'll use it and I'll be like, oh, I don't really like that quite as much. And then I'll go back to the other paper. I'm like, oh yeah, this is great. Let me just use this paper with this pen and this ink. That's great, and then I know I'm really gonna like that, but let me see what else looks really good on this other paper, you know? And so it's an excuse for me to try more inks and try other things to just get a different experience. And as I've been doing that for 6 years now, I've really learned to appreciate all different kinds of pens, nibs, ink, all that kind of stuff. I was a lot pickier when I first got into the hobby. Now I have a very wide range of things that I really like to write with based on my mood, the purpose that I'm going to be using the pen for, and all these different things. So, you know, for some people it's like, why in the world would you concern yourself with all these different factors? It's just a pen, for crying out loud. And I totally get that. But most people that think that way really don't get this hobby. Like this, a lot of it's about discovery. It's about trying a lot of different things, at least for me anyway. You know, some people are strictly just kind of utilitarian. It's like, give me my one pen, my black ink, and let me write on my legal pad. And that's totally fine. That's a very legitimate way to go about this hobby. For me though, the draw to it was all the different inks and the different ways the inks react and how it looks in sunlight versus you know, a halogen light, and you know, all these different things. It's really fun to kind of see how it all pans out. So for me, that's about it, and it really is about trying it for myself and having the experience. But I do understand how that can be frustrated if you are looking kind of for that consistency and so on. But yeah, I think I might have covered everything I was planning to say there. Kind of deviated from my notes there. Yeah, so last thing I'll say is other factors come into play besides just the pen, ink, and paper. You know, things that can affect how the color might look or how the ink might perform, like the writing angle, your writing pressure, writing speed, nib size, a lot of other variations as well. It's amazing though, just like what the difference in ink can look like with the same pen, ink, and paper when I write versus my wife. Because I write with a lower pen angle, I write a little bit faster, and I write with more pressure. She holds more upright, less pressure, and her ink looks a lot lighter than mine. So if you're using an ink that has a little more variation, light to dark, has a little more shading and stuff like that, It's always going to look darker and more vibrant when I'm writing with it versus my wife. So she tends to use really saturated inks because she writes lighter, so she likes to have those kind of saturated ones. I will vary all over the place. I do like deeply saturated inks, but when I use a lot of deeply saturated inks, I sometimes don't get as much color variation because I write with so much more pressure than she does. So it's just little interesting things like that. I appreciate some of the lesser saturated inks a little more because they don't look so washed out when I use them. So it's really different, even with the same combination of actual products, how different it can be from one person to another. So the journey is the experience, the journey is the reward, if you will. So trying a lot of different things out yourself is the fun part of this hobby, if you kind of come to terms with that and are interested in that. All right, last question I have for the week here is a troubleshooting question. This is from DrDeb on Facebook. What methods do you suggest for hard starting pens, and what exactly is baby's bottom? Now, I actually ended up covering a lot of this in the earlier question from Kevin, but so what do I suggest for hard starting pens? So this is more kind of a remedy answer. Can anything be done about it? So it's always good to clean the pen first. So that's just a blanket statement. Even if it's a brand new pen, you want to clean your pen because you could have machining oils, or you could have little bits of debris or something like that that are in there from manufacturing process. And that could be from any manufacturer. So it's always a good idea to clean your pen if you're having any type of flow issues. Me personally, I don't always end up sticking to that. I'm usually too excited and I just ink up the pen. And if I don't have any flow issues, great. If I do have any kind of issue whatsoever, I'm like, dang it, I should have cleaned out the pen first. And then I clean it out and then I write, and 90% of the time that fixes it. So that right there is always a good thing to do. But if you have a pen that you've been using for a while, it always is hard starts. Inspecting the tines is always the next best step. So I have a video on the Goulet loop. It's called the Goulet loop tutorial, I think it is. So that's always a good one to go and check out, because I show you not only how to use the loop, but what you're actually looking for as far as nib tine alignment, which often doesn't affect flow as much, but as it does the scratchiness and the feel on the page. But certainly the way that the tines are bent can influence the flow. So if you have a hard starting pen, it could either be because if you're looking at a nib as if it was face on here, right? So like this, you're looking at it like this. If you have nib tines and they are splayed inward like this, like they're pinched, and they're pinched together too closely, they're not parallel like this, but they're really pinched in. That can give you some dry writing issues, hard starting, things like that, because you're pinching off the channel for the capillary action to really be able to occur. So then it's only when you're writing with more pressure that it kind of flows out a little bit. You can also have the opposite problem of it being splayed outward too much. And then if that's, or even if it's more parallel, like it's kind of supposed to be, but then you write with heavier pressure, you can end up kind of splaying it out as you're writing, which can cause a break in the capillary action and actually cause it to work in reverse. Because if you got it flowing like this, ink wants to go where it's more constricted, so it's going to flow backwards. So that's going to be really frustrating for you. That can sometimes happen too. So what can anything be done about that? If they're pinched together, it's pretty easy. You just press down. So I'm turning my nib down like it's on the paper. You just press down with a little bit of writing pressure, and as you're pressing it down, it's going to splay those tines a little bit. Don't overdo it, because you wanted to give just a little bit of pressure to properly kind of spread them back out so they're a little more parallel, or maybe splayed just a little bit inward to assist that capillary action. If it's the opposite problem, if it's splayed outward, that's a little more complicated. The best kind of hack that I have for fixing that is to take the nib like this and to kind of pinch the end of the tines. And as you're pinching it with your fingernails, you twist so that you're actually twisting one of the tines over top of the other. And then you take it the other way and you twist it the other way. So you're actually twisting one tine over top of the other. And you do that several times, and that will eventually kind of pull the nib tines back a little closer together. Now that said, doing any of this kind of stuff, if you screw it up, you're on your own. it's always best to kind of contact your retailer and see if it's a newer pen. Contact your retailer and see if it's a warranty issue or anything like that you don't do. But if it's, assuming it's an inexpensive pen, it's not worth the hassle for you, or it's a pen that's older and isn't working as properly anymore, this could be the issue. Especially the splayed out one, because if you're writing with a pen for a number of years and you write with a really heavy hand, eventually the tines could kind of spread out. You gotta get them back. So doing that over and over again. Now you're almost always going to end up with, if you're looking at the nib like I'm stabbing you in the eye, if you're looking at it straight on, here's my tip like that, or I'll do it like this. So here's your tip. If you're taking and you're twisting the tines over top of each other like this to get them back closer together, you're never going to end up with, or very rarely would you end up with the nibs perfectly aligned again, because you're twisting them like you're super screwing them up like that. So you're going to twist it over top like that, and you're going to end up with a nib that's like that, and it's going to write really scratchy because you got one of the tines that's bending. So then you got to look at it and you got to you kind of bend them back. So you kind of like bend up just a little bit on one of the tines to kind of get it back into alignment. So if you twist it and it kind of ends up like this, like the splaying looks really good, but it's up like this again, then you kind of like bend this one up a hair here and there until they're kind of back in alignment again, right with it. And if it feels good on the paper, you're in pretty good shape. So that can help with that. And now you specifically asked me about baby's bottom. I'm realizing now this is like the exact same dang question that I answered with Kevin, because I over talked through Kevin's one and kind of filled in Deb's. See, I'd done notes on yours, Deb, and then I ended up using a lot of that information in Kevin's from earlier. But that's okay. We can duplicate a little bit. Doesn't hurt to hear this multiple times, because this is a lot of like information, right? So the last, where was I even talking about? Let's see, baby's bottom. Okay, so baby's bottom happens when the nib is properly aligned and everything. It's going to write really smooth. You want your ink to flow down your nib slit, and then it's going to come out of the bottom of your tip of your nib, right? Like, so this is the bottom, but your nib's not like perfectly pinched together like this. There's a little bit of a space there, and the way that it's ground is going to be a little bit of space down at the bottom like that. What baby's bottom is when you have too much ground away there at the bottom, and there's this big gap, big being very, very relative term here. There's too big of a gap at the bottom here. So the nib's going to write really smoothly, but what's going to happen is the ink's going to flow, and it's not really getting through that gap to get down to the actual paper. So it's only going to be when you tap it or when you write with a little more pressure that it's going to kind of start back up again. And usually once you get it flowing, it writes okay because it's kind of coming down. But, and this is usually on like broader nibs that you end up with baby's bottom issues. But as you're writing with it, if you have issues with it starting up, or you pause for a minute and it skips and stuff like that, but it writes really smooth, and then when you write with more pressure it starts up again, that's usually a sign of baby's bottom. So what do you do to fix that? You can grind it down. Not grind, but you can kind of polish it down with micro mesh and do like a little figure 8 pattern on the micro mesh, and that will kind of wear away the extra rounded parts and kind of get it back into more of the normal position that it's meant to be in. That will usually do the trick. Now I know like Stephen Brown has a video out there about baby's bottom. I've never done like a specific nib tuning video on how to fix baby's bottom. Maybe that's an opportunity for me. I will not commit to doing that because I have a habit of saying, oh yeah, I'll make a video about that, but it's something that I'll give some more thought. All right, that's it for this week. There it is. So thank you for tuning in. I have a question of the week this week that is not related to anything that I talked about in the Q&A. So I'm very curious to know, where do you use your fountain pens more? At work or at home? Go ahead and answer in the comments. I'm curious to know, just in general, do you end up being a work person or a home person as far as your fountain pen use? Me personally, I'm a work person. Obviously. There's no way I could use my pens more at home than I do at work, but that's my answer. So I'm curious to know from you. So go ahead and leave that there. Subscribe to my YouTube channel if you haven't already, because we put out tons and tons and tons and tons and tons and tons and tons of good fountain pen videos for your benefit for free. If you like any of the products I talked about here, go check them out on gouletpens.com. Support my store is always appreciated. It keeps the videos flowing. I hope you are having a good summer. things are getting slower, everybody's taking vacations, and that's totally cool, but you know, lots of opportunities if you got some downtime to be doing some extra little writing here and there, so take advantage of that. I will see you next week. I hope you had a good Q&A here. I hope you have a great rest of the week, and right on.